The Rambam says, Ugdoila hachnosas orchim. Hachnosas orchim is greater than Kabbalas Pnei Shechina, than greeting the face of the Shechina. As the Pasuk says, it's in the beginning of our Parsha, Vayar v'hinei shloisha anoshim, that Avraham Avinu sees these three men, which we know are three malachim, and so on. From the fact that the Rambam just brings these four words, Vayar v'hinei shloisha anoshim, he sees three men, he doesn't even allude to the next words by adding the word v'goymer, seems to imply that the proof is just from these few words by themselves. And the question is, how do we learn from these few words, Vayar, he sees three men, that hachnosas orchim is greater than greeting the Shechina? The question is even more. The source of this statement is in the Gemara, in Masechta Shabbos. There the Gemara actually brings a different pasuk from our story. The Gemara says hachnosas orchim is greater than Kabbalas Pnei Shechina because the pasuk says, Vayoymar adna imno motzasi chen beinecha al nosaver v'goymer. Hashem is, Avraham Avinu is addressing Hashem and saying, if I find favor in your eyes. As Rashi explains, he's asking Hashem not to move on. Rather, Avraham is leaving Hashem for right now to go and to greet the guests. And what's happening in the Rambam? The Rambam is changing from the proof from the Gemara, bringing a different proof. He's bringing a proof that seemingly not understood what the proof is from those words, as opposed to the proof in the Gemara, which seems to be quite clear what the proof is. And furthermore, this is the opposite of what the Rambam would usually do. The only time the Rambam would change and bring a different pasuk that's not mentioned in the Gemara is only if it's more explained, if it's more understood. Says the Rebbe, as far as the actual proof from the pasuk Vayar v'hinei shloisha anoshim, that we learn from this that hachnosas orchim is greater than Kabbalas Pnei Shechina. Says the Rebbe, seemingly we would be able to say that according to the Rambam, the proof is from the actual fact that he sees the three men. That is, in a state of Vayero of Hashem, when he's experiencing this revelation from Hashem. How is it even fitting that at the same time Avraham should be looking and noticing these three people, and noticing to the extent that he's really paying attention, that's what's eventually going to bring him to run towards them. If one is standing in front of Hashem, then seemingly any sort of motion, especially paying attention to people or to anything, shouldn't have any room, shouldn't take place at all. And the Rebbe says we can learn this with a kal v'chomer from Kriya Shema. We know that Kriya Shema is supposed to be said with full concentration, with awe and fear and trembling, etc. Because we're reading right now the proclamation of the king to his country. It needs to be as if it was something brand new, sent a message from the king to his country. Similarly, we know by Shemon Esrei, a Yid needs to be seeing himself as if he's standing there with the Shechina right opposite him. He needs to feel as if he's standing in front of the Melech Malchei Amlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the din then is that he's not allowed to interrupt for anything. He needs to stand like a servant in front of his master, without any movement, without any motion, not moving from his place. How much more so by Avraham, that he's standing in front of Hashem in the most revealed and greatest way. And it's not only like by Kriya Shema that it's as if he's reading a proclamation of the king that's brand new, but it's Vayero love Havaya Mamish. Hashem is literally revealing himself to him. So how does it make sense that at the same time he's seeing and noticing and paying attention to these three people? That itself tells us Hachnas Sarchim is even greater than greeting the Shechina. In other words, knowing that Hachnosas Orchim, the Shechina itself is telling us that it's greater than Kabbalas Pnei Shechina, therefore even as he's having Kabbalas Pnei Shechina, Avraham interrupts, and he is noticing these three people. So that's as far as how we could even see a proof within these few words. But the question still remains, says the Rebbe, why would the Rambam change from the proof from the Gemara and bring a different proof? Because obviously, says the Rebbe, the proof that the Rambam is bringing from seeing the three people is not a clearer proof than the proof from the Gemara, which is the proof from the pasuk where Hashem is where Avraham is turning to Hashem and asking him to wait so that he could greet the guests. And on the contrary, that pasuk seems to be a much stronger proof. Says the Rebbe, seemingly we would be able to answer this based on a machloikus. In Masechta Shavuos, the Gemara says that this idea that Hachnosas Orchim is greater than Kabbalas Pnei Shechina is actually connected with a machloikus hatanoim. It says that Kol Shemis Ha'amurim b'Torah, all the names that are mentioned in the Torah by Avraham Avinu, meaning the name Adnai, which could be a name of Hashem or it could mean my master. So the Gemara says that all the names that say by Hashem, by Avram, is actually the name of Hashem, including our pasuk, Vayomer Adnai Imno Matzosichein Beinecha, that it's a pasuk referring to Hashem. Avram is turning to Hashem. If I find favor in your eyes, please don't leave because I want to greet the guests. But there's also an opinion that says that it's Choyle, it's not Hashem's name. He's not saying it to Hashem, he's speaking to the Malachim. In other words, he's telling the Malachim, please don't pass, please come into my tent, etc. Now, we know that Rashi himself, in his Pirush al HaTorah, also brings both of these explanations. Says that this might be the reason that the Rambam doesn't want to bring that pasuk of Avram saying Al Nosavar, because the proof of this pasuk wouldn't work according to all opinions. Because again, if he's not speaking to Hashem, asking Hashem to wait, then there's no proof that Kabbalah's Orchim is greater than Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina. The Achnas Sorchim is greater than Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina. Especially, says the Rebbe, the Rambam in Moira Nevuchim, in fact, says that he was speaking to the Malach. However, says the Rebbe, this answer doesn't really work. Because in the Sefer Hayad, in the Yad HaChazaka, in the Sefer of Halacha, the Rambam does passing clearly that all the names, again, the names of Hashem, Adnai, that say by Avram are Kodesh, are names of Hashem, and the Rambam says clearly, including this pasuk, Adnai imno matzosichein harehu Kodesh. So again, this answer wouldn't work because clearly Avram was speaking to Hashem, and therefore our question again is, why doesn't the Rambam bring this pasuk as the proof? The Rebbe attempts now another answer. The Rebbe says in Moira Nevuchim, the Rambam explains that this whole idea of Avram seeing these three people and the whole continuation afterwards was all a vision of Avram. This is all a continuation to Vayero Elav Hashem. There's a certain godly revelation, and part of that whole vision is this whole story with the three men. Says that based on this, we may try to answer that according to the Rambam, there would be no proof from the pasuk where Avram turns to Hashem and says, don't pass, because I need to greet these people. Because that pasuk is, again, not a story that's actually happening physically, practically, but rather, this itself is part of what Avram is seeing in the vision, in his nevuah. But the Rebbe says that doesn't work, because the pasuk Vayarvi Nishleish Anashim, the pasuk that the Rambam brings as a proof, according to this Moira Nevuchim, that itself is also part of the vision. So again, one pasuk or one proof wouldn't be better than the other. They're both part of the vision. And if you want to say that you could prove it from the vision as well, from the nevuah as well, how? Because you'll say that the actual fact that Hashem is showing Avraham Avinu such a vision, that's proving that Achnas HaSorchim is greater than Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina. In other words, saying that the fact that that Hashem is speaking to Avraham Avinu and he's interrupting with speaking to him and going to the guests, or the fact that he sees the three people, that's a proof that Achnas HaSorchim is greater. Says the Rebbe, but again, on the contrary, if anything, then it would make again more sense to bring that second pasuk, the pasuk that the Gemara brings, where he's turning to Hashem and saying not to pass. Why? The Rambam explains over there in Moira Nevuchim that the Vayero of Hashem, that Hashem appears to him, that's the klal. That's sort of like the general idea of what's about to happen. Starting from the pasuk Vayarvi Nishleish Anashim, that he sees three men standing there, now it's starting to give us the details of that vision, that revelation of Hashem. He's starting to explain to us what exactly was the vision. The first thing is that he sees three people, etc. If that's the case, so when Vayarvi Nishleish Anashim, the pasuk that the Rambam brings, that he sees three people, if that's part of the vision, so then there's absolutely no proof that that's great, that Achnas HaSorchim is greater than Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina. Because if this is the first thing happening, that he's seeing the three people, then he didn't interrupt the Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina for it. In fact, the Vayero Elav Hashem, Vayar, the fact that he sees these three people, that itself is part of the prophecy, part of the Vayero Elav Hashem. That's all part of the Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina. He didn't interrupt the Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina. As opposed to the later pasuk, where he turns to Hashem in the vision, let's say, and he says, Al Nosaver, don't go away, since Hashem is showing that as part of the vision, how Avraham is telling him, don't leave, so clearly that would be a proof that Achnas HaSorchim is greater than Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina. In addition to this, says the Rebbe, it's very, very difficult to say in Sefer Hayad, to explain the Rambam in the Sefer Hayad, according to the way he explains it in the Moira Nevuchim. Because in the Sefer Hayad, in his book of Halacha, the Rambam doesn't mention this at all, that it was a vision. and that it didn't happen practically, physically. He doesn't say this whole thing at all, that it was just a vision and nevuah. In fact, says the Rebbe, if you look at the Rambam, it's almost explicit that it all happened practically. And therefore, once again, we're stuck with this question, why is the Rambam bringing this pasuk of Ayarvi Nishlesh Anoshim? Says the Rebbe, we're going to understand all of this by first having a closer look at the words of the Rambam in the previous mentioned halachis. The Rebbe starts off with quoting the first halacha there. Mitzvahs hasei shel devrayim, the Rambam says it's a mitzvah from the Chachamim to do various different things, like levaker cholim, visiting the sick. He mentions ulalavoy sa'orchim, to accompany guests. Notice over here it does not say hachnas ha'sorchim, it says accompanying guests. Then the Rambam goes on with some other things that it's a mitzvah to do. Then in the following halacha, the Rambam says, the reward for accompanying is more and greater than everything else. This is the law that Avraham Avinu had said. This is the path of chesed in which he acted. He gave the people passing by to eat and to drink. He would accompany them. Then the Rambam goes on with saying that Achnas Tzorchim is greater than greeting the Shechina, as it says, Vayarvi Nishlesh Anoshim. And accompanying them is even more and greater than the Achnas Tzorchim itself. And the Rambam finishes off by saying, someone that does not accompany the guests, it's as if he's spilling blood. The Rebbe asks, why is it that in the first halacha, where the Rambam is speaking about what's the mitzvah say of the Chachamim, it just says, Ulalavoy Sarchim, to accompany the guests. Why doesn't he say a more inclusive general term, Hachnos HaSarchim? Now, simply the way we learn it is, that in this halacha, the Rambam is speaking about mitzvahs hasei of the Chachamim, which are mainly connected with what we call Gemilas Chasadim Shebegufay, Gemilas Chasadim that we do with our own person, with our own body. Like Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick, comforting the mourners, etc. And as the Rambam actually concludes over there, he says, these are the Gemilas Chasadim Shebegufay, these are the things what a person does with his own body, She'ein Lahem Shir, that don't have a limit, as opposed to the kind of Achnosas Orchim, which is like feeding the guests and giving them to drink, etc., which is more a monetary thing, which actually does have a limit, how much one would have to spend money on that sort of Gemilas Chasadim or Achnas HaSarchim. And as the Rambam explains this difference in his Pirush HaMashnayos. However, says the Rebbe, this is not a sufficient explanation. Because in the second halacha that we quoted before, the Rambam is speaking about the Choik Shechakak Avraham Avinu, this law that Avraham Avinu had instituted, and there he clearly includes feeding the people passing by, giving them to drink. In fact, he brings what we quoted before, this idea of Hachnas HaSorchim being greater than Kabbalas B'nai Shechina. But if we said that we're speaking mainly about Gemilas Chasadim Begufoy, the Gemilas Chasadim that we're just doing with our physical body, then why are we speaking about giving to eat and to drink, which again would be Hachnas HaSorchim, doing with our money? If the Rambam is just trying really in our halacha just to bring out the special advantage or quality, virtue of accompanying by itself, then he should have just said that this is the law that Avraham Avinu had instituted, and this is what he did. He would accompany the guests, or something like that. Or at the very least, Rambam could have said that after he gave them to eat and drink, he would accompany them, to emphasize that we're speaking mainly about this idea, the great quality of accompanying the Gemilus Chasadim Shebegufay. But from the wording of the Rambam, it seems to be that it is relevant over here, all of these different details of Achnos HaSarchim, also the fact that he gave the people passing by to eat and to drink. The Rebbe says it's very difficult to say that the Rambam is only bringing these details only as an introduction to bring out even more the quality of accompanying, because as the Rambam says, that accompanying them is even more than Achnos HaSarchim. Especially that the statement that the Rambam brings at the end, that the Chachamim say that if you don't accompany, it's like you're spilling blood, that definitely emphasizes the importance and the urgency of accompanying in the greatest way. You don't need anything more than that. The Rebbe says another thing we need to understand. The Rambam starts off by saying that the reward for accompanying is more than everything else. Then he concludes, Amru Chachamim, the Chachamim say, anyone that doesn't accompany is as if he's shofech damim, spilling the blood. Similarly, when he's speaking in the following halacha about Beis Din, he says, Beis Din would make sure, they would send shluchim to accompany the person that's passing from one place to the other. If they're lazy and lax about this, it's considered as if they spilled blood. Now, as we learned this simply, this is the reason why it's so important for accompanying, and if not, it's as if spilling blood, is because in that way you're ensuring that this person should not get killed along the way. So he's being given accompaniment. as the proof that the Gemara brings Masechta Soita tells a story about this, etc. But the question is, since we're trying to say that the idea of accompanying is so great that if not, it's as if you're spilling blood, so then to mention that reward for accompanying is greater than everything else, compared to that, seems already to be very, very secondary. As we know, there's a klal mosayimana, included in the bigger thing, included in 200 is 100. So why the need even to mention that? Says the Rebbe, we can explain it in the following way. When we speak about gemilus chasadim, there's really two ideas, two details, 2 points. There is what's being achieved by the mitzvah. In other words, that's when your act of gemilus chasadim, you're giving something that or someone that which he was lacking, or bringing him some sort of benefit and use. The other aspect is the act of the person doing the chesed, the midas ha-chesed, the actual midah, the characteristic of chesed, the kindness of the person doing the act. Similarly, says the Rebbe, there are these two ideas. There is the things that the visitor, the guest is receiving, the food, the drink, etc., through specific actions. And then there is the midah of chesed of the host, of the person that's giving the guest what he needs. And here we're speaking about how he cares about the guest, how he pays attention to him, takes an interest in him, that all of which he's showing to this visitor, to this guest. Says the Rebbe, generally by gemilus chasadim, especially, and generally also by mitzvah sheben adam lachaveiroi, what's most important is the bottom line, what was achieved, the benefit, the good, the use that the person had received. Whereas the midah of chesed of the person doing the kindness, that's mostly important, not so much for the person receiving it, but that's more about the person who's doing it. We find by tzedakah, for example, a person could lose a coin and a poor person finds it and has parnasa from it. The person who lost it fulfilled its tzedakah, because the bottom line is that what was supposed to be achieved was achieved. Says the Rebbe, by Achnas HaSorchim, there's a special chiddush. The midas ha-chesed, that midah of kindness, the feeling of chesed of the balabayis, of the host, is actually extremely important to the end result as well, to that which we're doing for the guest. Meaning, Achnas HaSorchim has to be in a way that the guest should feel that everything that the host is doing for him is coming from his interest, from his care, from his feeling, from his avas Yisrael. As the Rambam actually alludes to this, saying that all these mitzvahs are part of the Ahavta l'recha kamoicha. Says the Rebbe, this is specifically expressed in the obligation of accompanying the guest. Because accompanying the guest is seemingly not something that you're giving him something that he needs, you're filling his needs, as is the case with food and drink. Rather, this is coming purely from the midah of chesed, of gemilus chasadim. And therefore, even after seemingly there's no connection anymore between them, he fed him already, he gave him to drink, the person is leaving already, he's on his way, and yet you're still accompanying him. It's at this point that the oirech, the guest, really feels that everything you did for him previously as well was really coming from the feelings of your heart, or the feeling of the host, from his interest, from his care, that he really cares about my benefit and what's good for me. Says the Rebbe, this is now what the flow of what the Rambam is saying. The Rambam says, Schar Alaviyah, the reward for accompanying is more than everything else. This is the law that Avraham Avinu had instituted, the way of kindness that he acted in. He gave the people to eat and drink and accompany them. What's this referring to? When we speak about the law that Avraham Avinu had instituted, it's not only referring to this specific detail of accompanying. He's speaking more about the general attitude of the kind of Achnas HaSorchim, that Avraham Avinu set up Achnas HaSorchim in a way that it needs to contain not only the act and the bottom result of gemilus chasadim, that the guest is getting what he needs, but also the midah of chesed of the host. That's the derech ha-chesed that Avraham Avinu acted in. And therefore that's part of the fact that he's accompanying the guest, is all part and parcel of giving them to eat and drink, as explained. The accompanying is really showing that care. Says the Rebbe, based on this we can now also explain what the Rambam concludes by saying, that the Chachamim say, if you don't accompany, it's like shayfer adamim, like spilling blood. That this is all sort of part of the special quality of what accompanying is all about. And as we said that the reward for a Leviyah is more than everything which you mentioned earlier. It's part of that same thing. How so? when the Rambam says that it's like shvichos damim, he doesn't only mean that it could lead eventually to shvichos damim, to the spilling of the guest's blood on the way, as we explained before. He's also referring to the feeling of shvichos damim by the guest right now, meaning to say, if the host is not accompanying him, that means the guest is seeing that there's a certain lack of interest, a lack of devotion from the host to the guest. Then the midas hachesed itself and everything that he got sort of is not so comfortable by him anymore. He's not so happy with it anymore. As the expression azul sumka va'asa chivra, now he's changing colors. He's a little bit embarrassed. He's feeling some sort of disgrace, and that's what the shvichas damim is. We know that when you embarrass someone, it's a certain union of shvichas damim. In other words, he's feeling that it wasn't all meant sincerely. Someone was just doing him this favor, but not really caring about him. And the Rebbe says this is actually similar to what we say by tzedakah as well, although in the footnotes the Rebbe does clarify some of the differences also. But we know that tzedakah needs to be given b'sever panim yofos. You need to give it in a happy way, in a smiling way, b'simcha. And the person giving the tzedakah needs to feel sympathy and for the with the person in his troubles, etc. Whereas if you're giving the poor person tzedakah and you're just showing him a sour face, with your face looking down at the ground, etc., you're losing your whole schus because you're missing the point. Says the Rebbe, according to this, we can also understand the reason why the Rambam, specifically in the mitzvah of achnosas orchim, he points out specifically to this idea of accompanying the guests. Because specifically over here, that this is such a crucial part in the mitzvah of achnosas orchim, this idea of really showing the care, the attention to the guest. And furthermore, if you're not accompanying him, then you're also lacking, even in the mitzvah of achnosas orchim, even in the eating and drinking that you gave him, there's going to be something major lacking. Says the Rebbe, now we can go back and understand why the Rambam specifically brings as a proof for this idea that achnosas orchim is greater than greeting the Shechina, the pasuk of Vayero v'hinei shloisha anoshim, and that he changes from the Gemara, which learns it out from the pasuk where Avraham is telling Hashem to wait, not to leave. And this is all coming in continuation to the way we explained the halacha, this law that Avraham Avinu had instituted, the way of kindness that he had acted in. That this is such a crucial part of achnosas orchim is the midah of chesed that's involved in it, the special attention and care that you're giving to the guest. And this, says the Rebbe, is not only something that you're doing when you're doing the act of achnosas orchim, of giving it to eat and drink, or afterwards when you're accompanying him. Really, it starts even before that. The moment you see the guest, the moment you're greeting him, you're taking him, it's already so crucial over here how much attention and care you're showing to this guest. And that's what's expressed in our pasuk, Vayero v'hinei shloisha anoshim, as we explained before, the actual fact that he saw them. He's paying attention to them in middle of greeting the Shechina. Says the Rebbe, according to all of this, we can explain another question in this whole idea of how we learn from Avraham that G'doi la'achnosas orchim v'kabolas pnei Shechina. And here's the question. The bottom line is, it turns out at the end of the day, that by giving these three people, the three malachim, food and drink, Avraham Avinu, in fact, was not fulfilling achnosas orchim. Because in truth, they weren't humans, they were malachim that don't need food and drink. Especially according to the opinion that they didn't actually even drink, they just pretended to drink. Even according to the opinion that they were literally eating and drinking. But even that was not because they needed the food and drink, it was just for the respect and honor to Avraham. Or as it says, you go to a place, you act according to the customs, the manner of the place. And therefore, once again, the question is, practically, it wasn't real achnosas orchim or gemilas chasadim d'orchim. They don't even need it. And therefore, the question is, says the Rebbe, number one, since in truth, it wasn't the true mitzvah of achnosas orchim, so then you shouldn't be allowed to interrupt greeting the Shechina for that. So how is it possible that Avraham Avinu Chas v'Shalom was stumbled in such a thing to leave the Shechina behind, greeting the Shechina just for achnosas orchim that's not even real? Secondly, says the Rebbe, it's very difficult to say that we're learning a din, a halacha, which is emes, the concept of g'doi la'achnosas orchim. We're learning it from something which in truth wasn't even an act of achnosas orchim. Says the Rebbe, so we must say that although the guests of Avraham Avinu only came in the image of people, in the image of humans, and seemingly they didn't need the achnosas orchim, Nevertheless, there was nothing lacking in Avraham Avinu's Achnasas Orchim. In other words, it's not only that according to what he saw, he's fulfilling the mitzvah of Achnasas Orchim, but it's in fact so. How is this? Says the Rebbe, the explanation is, as we explained, the main point of the Achnasas Orchim is emphasized, the Chiddush of Achnasas Orchim, not so much in the act of giving the person to eat and drink, what the person is receiving, the guest is receiving, but as we said, the main Chiddush over here is that Midah of Chesed. We said this is the Derech HaChesed that Avraham Avinu had acted in. In other words, this idea of really paying attention to the guest, taking an interest in the guest. And all of this idea was by Avraham Avinu in this story as well, in the greatest way. Furthermore, says the Rebbe, not only from Avraham's perspective, but also in that which is achieved in the guests. In our case, the Malachim of Achnasas Orchim was also achieved in the greatest way. Because as we said before, the main point is that the Oirach is happy. The visitor, the guest is happy that you're paying so much attention to him, caring about him, etc. Well, that applies to the Malachim as well. That they too are so happy of the interest that Avraham is showing them, especially when they're coming in the image of humans. Even more so, says the Rebbe, especially when we're speaking about not just any host giving them attention, we're speaking about Avraham Avinu giving them attention, who is so precious to the Eibishter, so beloved to the Eibishter. As it says also in our parsha, Ki Yedaitiv, Hashem says, and the word Yedaitiv means that Hashem loves Avraham Avinu. And generally we know Avraham Avinu, the Av is generally the Merkava, the chariot of Hashem, which Malachim realize to them, it's revealed that Avraham Avinu is even greater than the Malachim. So surely, when they see this idea that Avraham Avinu is paying attention to them, so surely this has that content, the main point of Achnasas Orchim, coming from Avraham Avinu, also even from the perspective of the Malachim themselves.